Alrighty, so we're gonna zip on now and go to Theresienstadt. Okay, and I hope it's not gonna be lagging. Thank you. A subject particularly dear to my heart. I'm kind of a little bit crazy about housing. I guide groups there. I think I visited it about 12 times, and every time I go to Prague, I have to go again. There's something about this place that really haunts me. So I want to give you a whole model, how you could teach a subject only using art and not feel that you've kind of left anything out. Now, housing is a massive subject. We talked 3 days about it. Aspects about the leadership, but I'm going to talk about a part of housing that gets less airtime because it's a little less sexy. Most of us have talked about the operas and the culture and Brundibar and all of these things that happen in Theresienstadt. I want to talk about aspects that we see beautifully through the eyes of artists. And one other thing, and as Michael can tell us as a historian, when we have different witnesses talking about and showing the same event, bearing historical witness, it kind of gives validity to a historical event. And I'm going to show you how different artists showed the same scenes without even knowing, and how it's really amazing. So without further ado, we're going to go to the first slide. And I want to show you again a model how you guys can do this with your kids. So I'm not sure if we're seeing it yet. Maybe you want to mute my face so that it will be less bandwidth. Great. Here is a little garrison town. If you go here from Prague, it takes about 40 minutes on the bus if there's no traffic. If you show it to your students and don't tell them what they're seeing and just about it, looks very pretty, it looks very provincial, it's kind of interesting shape, a lot of greenery, doesn't look particularly threatening. And if you go to the next slide, I don't know if you're there yet, it should be a picture actually of me in Theresienstadt with a group. When you go there, one of the things that groups always tell me is, how could anything bad have happened here? It's not the most exciting place. It's kind of a backwater. It's just a typical little European town. There's a church, there's cars parked, there's a little restaurant here and there. If you go in the summer, this park is actually very pretty. There's flowers, there's trees. How do we tell the story of a place that doesn't really exist in the same way anymore? And how do we make sure that the voices of those people who suffered there are not forgotten? And to do that, you have to kind of be almost a magician. You have to take people on a journey back to what happened in those days. And for me, as a visual person, doing it through art really gets you right in your stomach. Because in Warsaw Ghetto, they had the ability, and in 100 other ghettos in Nazi-occupied Poland, the Jews had the ability to try and fight back. You know, Warsaw Ghetto uprising, there were attempts at uprising. You couldn't do that in this ghetto. The conditions were not right enough to do that in this ghetto. They never had an uprising. They fought back in other ways. And one of the ways they fought back was through art. And I'm going to show you how that happens as we progress. So next slide, please. And I'm going to show you really briefly. That little town, seeing it from the air looks like nothing. The artist, sorry, it's actually Leo Haas, not Frederick Frita. I mislabeled this one. Please excuse me, Leo, and excuse me, Frederick. Shows us in one picture, it's kind of like, and if we go around, and I hope you can see it, if you notice, what's some of the things we noticed when we look at this picture? What will your students say? What is the first impression we get when we see this picture? Do we see incredible overcrowding? Do we see people, let's see, the incredible overcrowding. We see a lot of elderly people, horror, Randy says. We see, again, a dead tree in the middle. We see darkness. We see people coming in, a lot of people eating out of barrels. We see overcrowding in the buildings. We see people making music in secret attics. We see people going off to work. We see all things in one picture. And if you look on the lower left-hand side, we see the hands of an artist recording it all. That artist is Leo Haas. And if you look here on the right, kind of looking off, he's over the barbed wire, is this little wistful figure looking at the freedom. And the reason I put myself up with that picture is you could see the church. So overlooking all of it in the light is the church of Theresienstadt. Not used. It was closed during the war, but there it is. Almost a condemnation. How is this allowed to happen in a world that is supposed to be ruled by Christian goodness, by love your neighbor? And Ellen, who, I love Ellen. Ellen is really, she sees the light and everything. You can see the sun rising in the corner. And Randy is saying, not invite. Barbara Dennis, Ellen says, man, look at all of this. My mother-in-law lived in Ostrava and was rounded up and sent to have some of the money from the ghetto. I showed it to my students. Barry, I'm going to tell you a story about that money, about the artist who created the Moses cone, and it's an amazing story. Okay, so next slide. So of course, in any example, when we teach the Holocaust, I can't just show you this picture, and as Gail told me before, and not give you the history. So we have to spend a little bit of time talking about the history so that your students will understand and that it will be more clear what we're talking about. So we're going to talk about what is today Czech Republic. When the Nazis, 1938, the Nazis take an area that had been part of Czech Republic, and they create what's called the Sudetenland. A lot of those people felt they were German, so for them it was kind of a homecoming. Those who didn't feel they were German flee into this area that we know as today as Czech Republic. In March 1939, excuse me, the Nazis invade and they create what's called the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. So Czechoslovakia, this entity that's created after World War I, no longer exists. It's Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Slovakia, which is here to the right, many Jews from that area that were taken into Hungary will be sent to Auschwitz only in 1944. We're not going to talk about them. We're talking about the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Now, what happens to the Jews in Prague, who were very similar to German Jews? The Jews in Czech Republic today had a lot more in common with those Jews than they would have had with my family, who was from Grodno in Belarus. They didn't speak Yiddish, most of them. Most of them spoke, there was this reawakening of the Czech language in the 1860s, so they either speak Czech or German. There was never a big Hasidic movement. A Hasidic movement starts about 300 years ago in Czechoslovakia, so you're not going to find Hasidic Jews. There are some who emigrate in the 20th century, late 19th century, but it never took hold as a big movement as you would find in Western the countries of Eastern Europe. By the way, if you want to insult someone from Czech Republic, tell them they're Eastern Europe. They are Central Europe, they are Central Europeans. They don't like being called Eastern Europeans. And there's this real kind of kinship with German Jews. So what happens to the Jews in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia mirrors what happens to the Jews in Germany. Next slide. 1941, when they start to send German Jews to Lodz Ghetto. And tomorrow Cheryl is going to be talking about Lodz Ghetto. And it's a forgotten part of Lodz Ghetto that many, many Jews from Germany and many Jews from Czech Republic were sent there, from Prague and Ostava and all these places, Brno. About 5 transports with more than 5,000 people take off to Lodz Ghetto. One of them goes to Minsk. And when you go to Prague, you see these Stoppelsteiner, these beautiful memorials, this really brilliant idea that these are kind of embedded in the sites where Jews lived. And on Poliska Street, there's one that I always try and show students right away, a little girl called Eva Abosova, who was about 10 when she was deported with her family to Lodz Ghetto and murdered. It's not quick enough. You still have Jews, these pesky Jews living in Prague, living in Brno, living in Czech Republic. What do you do with them? So the idea comes up that you're going to send them to a a place that's going to be a, what's the word? Not temporary, it's going to be like a permanent place where they're going to ride the war out. They're not going to be sent to the east. They're not going to be sent to some ghetto like Lodz ghetto. They're going to be allowed to remain in the borders of Czech Republic, of the Bohemian Moravia. They'll ride the war out, and it's a lot more attractive and seems a lot more safe. So next slide. Where do you find a place like this? I don't know, Morgan, have you moved it to the next one? Well,
it's on the Empress Maria Theresa, this one?
Fabulous.
Okay.
Fabulous. In the 1700s, they started making these forts, which almost immediately became obsolete. They were garrison towns to kind of protect places like Prague from invading armies. Prague then was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And under the Maria Teresa, who was one of the renowned anti-Semites in history, she actually throws the Jews out of Prague, out of Czechoslovakia, the Czech lands in 1740, throws them out, 1744, excuse me, throws them out. They can't come back for about 5 years. Not a very nice lady. And her son creates this garrison town in her name. So in Czech it's called Terezín, and in German it's called Theresienstadt. So the garrison town is almost immediately obsolete. By the beginning of the 20th century, it had been used to house the Czech army in World War I. The Nazis had stopped in it on their way to Prague. It has derelict buildings. It's nasty. It has a small core of people not living in the great big kind of abandoned military barracks, but more in the houses in the middle. Go to the next slide. Are we there yet?
Yes, the map is up.
Okay. Okay, so there's the map. I don't see it yet. You can see this old garrison town. It's really tiny. There's a little, on the right is a little concentration camp called the Small Fortress. Even though Jews were sent there, that is more where political dissidents, etc., were sent. So that's a concentration camp. We're going to concentrate on the ghetto itself. It's tiny. For those of you who have been, it's a little teeny weeny place. You can walk from one end to the other in 5 minutes. In 1941, there were about 7,000 Czech Christian people living in this place. And next slide. In November 1941, they send a group of young men to fix up the joint. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So Terezín actually serves 3 functions. It's a transit camp for the Jews of Bohemia and Moravia. For the first 9 or 10 months of this place's existence, the only people who were sent here were Jews from Bohemia and Moravia, Prague, Brno, etc., as a kind of stopover, a waiting room to be sent to places in the East. It's also going to be a camouflage for the murder of the Jews of Europe and the world, and that really gets started after the Wannsee Conference in January 1942. They're going to start to send Jews here from places like Germany, places like Austria, Holland, etc., as a way of kind of covering up what they're doing. Because the Red Cross might ask questions, and the Red Cross actually visits this terrible place at least 3 times. And the last one is a ghetto labor camp run by the SS, which makes it different than places like Warsaw. This is run by the Nazis, it's run by the SS, even though there is a Jewish Jewish council. They are really the ones who are running this place is the SS, which kind of qualifies it also as a concentration camp, ghetto labor camp. So it wears 3 hats. It's not exactly a ghetto, it's not exactly a labor camp, it's kind of in between. And it really is going to be used as a way of fooling the world later on. Not yet. In 1941, 1942, the Nazis are more concerned about pleasing their superiors. Look how efficient this place is, look how we're doing everything so efficiently. But that's the purpose of the camp. It's a massive holding pen. Some Jews were here for 2 years, some poor individuals, and I do a lot of research about Terezín, I go through a lot of transit lists. Some of them were here for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, you barely get enough time to realize where you are before they were sent off to other places in the East. Next. And one of the, you can see here from where Jews were sent. These are 2 pieces of artwork created by an amazing Jewish artist who I'll talk about called Petr Keen. He was forced to make artwork, we'll talk about that in a minute, by the Nazis. The Nazis had this like this great collection of very talented people. And they said, great, you're going to make stuff for us. You're going to make transit lists, you're going to make maps, you're going to make etc. We're going to send it to our superiors. They're going to see how busy we are. They're going to see this beautiful artwork. They're going to see how good we're working. So you can see from Germany, 56,923 Jews are sent. Osmark, which is Austria, 15,026. Protectorate, that's Bohemia and Moravia, Czech Republic today. Denmark, Holland, all neatly shown there, all ready to show to the higher ups, created by Jewish slave labor. Remember I showed you Redrick Frita as the art slave. Of the 88,196 prisoners who were reported to the east, only 3,800 survive. 35,000 die in Theresienstadt. Statistically, that's almost as much as Warsaw, statistically. And of the 7,590 children who were deported to the east, 142 survive. And yet this place has kind of the frivolous reputation of being the good ghetto, the better ghetto. It's a horrible place. It's a place of starvation, deprivation. Next slide, please. And even worse, of constant and terrifying transports to the east. So here we are, Leo Haas, this artist from, this is one of my idols. It's an artist from works in Prague, I think he's from Ostrava, sent to the camp, forced to make artwork for the Nazis. Oh, let's go back one more, please. Look at this drawing. Here they are. This is called the Technische Abteilung, and I'm sure Peter, Mr. Hayes, you probably pronounce German much better than me. No artist needs to work like that. They're sitting on top of each other. They're being forced to make this artwork for the Nazis. They have to make the charts. They have to make everything here, working really as slaves. And these are the artists who are going to steal a paper and pencil to show what's happening in the ghetto. And that work is what we're going to talk about. So next. And here's an excellent example. Redrick Frita, who we've already met, Tomi's father, is forced to make this drawing, this watercolor drawing, showing the building of the barracks. Now, when the Aufbau Commando arrives, when these young men arrive to this place that's derelict, these great big buildings that are filled with lice and fleas, and there's no running water, and there's no beds, and there's no facilities for thousands of people, they have to quickly build the camp up. And most of them don't know how to do this. It's chaos. But here, for your bosses, look how we can show them with the building material. And it's so clean and bright, and look at them in their work outfits, and what a wonderful work the Nazis are doing to make this into a livable place. Let's see what it's really like. Next. I can't see it yet, but I know what I'm talking about. So if you do the next one, Redrick Frita shows us what happens all the time. This is the Sudeten barracks. These buildings, these great big buildings have names. Hamburg barracks, Sudeten barracks. And when more and more Jewish people arrive, they're forced to move from one barracks to the other. On this particular occasion, the Nazis decide they're going to empty out an entire barracks with thousands and thousands of people, give them 2 or 3 days to get out, and move members of the Jewish offices of the Jewish council in there. Look at the chaos. First of all, look at the building work there. Look how shoddy it is. These are not people who are given materials that are, that you can build good buildings with. Look at the people scurrying around and running. Look at the chaos. Look at them holding planks, and half of them are trying to build and half of them are leaving. The chaos, the unorganized part of it. People are living in these terrible conditions. That's the real Theresienstadt. And that's what he wanted us to see. Next. So we're going to come into the camp. Let me see the next slide, Morgan. I don't know if I can see it yet. Okay, we're going to get into the camp first. We're going to talk about the transports. And notice I haven't used any photographs except for the picture of me there, because I like that picture because it kind of shows the parts of the camp. I'm going to found it online. How do they arrive there? Well, some Jews actually didn't arrive in cattle cars. A lot of the Jews who arrived from Germany arrived in second-class trains, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Look at this drawing. It's an etching, a drawing that's made into an etching later. He does a series of etchings based on drawings he creates in the camp, Leo Haas. Look at them tumble bodies lying on the floor. Up until 1943, they are not coming into Theresienstadt itself. They're going to a town that's about 2.5 kilometers away called the Husovice nad Oje. They have to walk on a dirt track. Do you think those people are going to be able to sledge through the dirt and the muck and the wet, carrying their baggage after enduring a train ride journey like this? And look on the left, look at the SS men. Stephen Marcus, he's my guy, Leo Haas. By the way, he's the one who adopts Tommy briefly until his wife dies, and then he can no longer take care of Tommy after the war, and Tommy lives in an orphanage. And that's when my friend Jana met him. Look at the SS man. He's on the left. He's wearing a nice warm coat. He's got a cigar hanging out of his mouth. Does he seem in any way even sympathetic to the scenes around him? And the answer is no. Next. Now, Leo Haas does something that's I love. He did a series of drawings, but when the drawings were found after the war, he took part of them and created etchings from the drawings. So they're like almost one-on-one from the drawings. For those of you who don't know what etchings are, if you take a piece of metal and put something on top of it, some kind of wax, you can actually make a drawing into the wax, and where you make your little ink, your little lines, you put it in acid, the acid eats into the wax, and then you can print it. So he makes a printing of the horrors of Terezin in 1966, and these are all from that, from his actual artwork he creates in the ghetto. And here we have people arriving, and look at them. What kind of people are arriving here? Do you notice that most of them are elderly? Do you notice that they are dragging a few little things with them? Do you notice that the name of the picture is very strange? It's called SS Dog. Who thinks the emphasis here is really on the dog? Does anyone really think that? And again, open to interpretation. Some people have seen that dog and thinks he's kind of scary. Me, as a dog owner of a very lazy dog, the dog looks like he's kind of like fed up. He's got his tongue hanging out. He's like schlepping along. He's not menacing these people. Who's the real dog here? Who's the real menace? Who's the real scary animal? I'm not going to use the word animal, the real scary force. Does everyone see that shadowy figure behind? He's right in between the nurse, these two little old ladies in the front. It almost looks like Darth Vader. Thank you, Morgan. There he is. That's one of the guards. And I think that he wants to put the emphasis again on the suffering of the people here. Not on the guards, not on their faces. They're suffering. Even the dog is forced to suffer, forced to be part of this whole, this whole terrible scene that being a dog, being man's best friend, he probably didn't want to be part of. Nobody's looking at us except for one face. And what face is that? Does everyone see the child looking at us? Do you remember I talked to you and talked to your students about this? Remember I showed you Felix Nussbaum looking at us. Who are we? Who is this child as he looks at us? Are we bystanders? Are we another assessment? Who are we? If he's looking at us, he's engaging with us. Everyone else is miserably entering the ghetto. Next. Another picture of elderly people arriving. We're going to talk about the elderly as a subject most people don't talk about when they talk about Theresienstadt. Look at them. Here they are. They've arrived in Bohusovice. These are the ones that can't even walk. So they're the ones who are really far gone. They just threw them in this flatbed truck. You see some poor old deer's got her legs sticking up. People are dead. People are hanging on the outsides, hanging onto their luggage. They're jumbled up together. This is their entry into the camp. This is how dehumanizing, how degrading. Next. And once they come in, here is the part of the camp you can't go into. Most of Theresienstadt, the middle part, the part you can see today, was blocked off by the Nazis. We have a guard standing here. So here they are coming in by these great big thick walls, moving in. If you look on the right, look at the crowding of the people looking out the window at them. Look at the stamps of the SS man standing there with his legs splayed. And sometimes inanimate objects have a presence. Look at the presence of that flag. And I'm going to show you another piece of artwork where the flag also has a presence. There it is, the Nazi list, the swastika kind of shadowing over. And here these people are arriving. And look at the use of light, how the light is kind of, there they are lit up. It's almost like a stage. It's almost like some kind of terrible theater production. It's kind of awful theater production. Next. Okay, Morgan, you got it? Great. By the way, I also want to correct a misconception because so many people say everyone in Theresienstadt was sent to Auschwitz. That's not true. Almost half the people who arrived in Theresienstadt, 42,005 people, never went to Auschwitz. Because beginning in January 1942, they started to send people out to places like Riga, places like Izbica. If you've been to Poland, Jews were sent to Izbica. They actually have two ghettos, two Jewish councils there, one of Polish Jews and one of Czech Jews. The terrible, terrible camp of Mali Trostenice near Minsk, where almost as many Jews were murdered as Majdanek. And in 10 transports in the fall of 1942 to the terrible death camp of Treblinka. Of all the Jews who were sent there, which is 42,005, 224 people survived. If you go to the next slide, starting in November 1942, also they start to send transports to Auschwitz. And after Treblinka and the Reinhardt camps are dismantled, no longer used, all the transports go to Auschwitz. So almost half of them never went to Auschwitz. We're going to talk about transports DN and DNA, which has a very strange thing. We see 1,196 and 53. We believe DNA was actually attached to DN. And those are the transports of what we call the Bialystok children. It's a shocking story in itself that was witnessed and illustrated by at least 6 artists. Okay, so those are the transports. Okay, I see, Doug, thank you very much. The 2 people in the window next to the soldier, yes, but that is like a commandant. I'm answering Chris's question where the soldier was standing. That was kind of like the booth for the soldiers. Okay, so we're gonna go next. Next, please.
You see it?
Okay, I'm going to show you 2 contrasting drawings. This is a drawing by Joe Spear, who was a really brilliant commercial illustrator from Holland, who has the unfortunate job of having book 44 to the camp, which we'll talk about soon, in 1944, June 44. He has to illustrate this little booklet they get showing what a nice place this is. And here he shows the creating of the railway line into the camp. Walk from and they're deported.
Liz, we're having some trouble hearing you. You're breaking up a bit. The last part we heard was the construction of the railway line.
Right. So it was extended into the camp in 1943. So from 1943 onwards, people didn't have to walk. They were taken right into the camp and deported from the camp. And if you go in to visit Theresienstadt, there's a street about how the railway lines, the train station street. So Joe Spear, did I tell you about Joe Spear? Everyone heard that? This is his drawing he's forced to make for the Nazis of the construction. If you go to the next, next, please. You're going to say Leo Haas's drawing, building the railway spur. Who's actually building this, friends? Look at the condition of the workers. Look at the poor little room there. Even when it was liberated, a huge amount of elderly people were liberated from this camp. So it's these elderly, half-sick people who are building the railway spur. Next. Have you gone to the next slide yet?
Yes, we're on the first train slide.
Okay. You know, when you teach this subject and you use art, for me, art and poetry go hand in hand. And I have a lot of heroes. And it's weird that a 56-year-old woman should have a hero who was a 14-year-old little boy who was murdered in Auschwitz. But I think Hannes Hachenberg could have been one of the great poets of history had the Nazis not seen fit to end his life in such a brutal way at the age of 14. And he takes part in a children's magazine called Vedum. And he writes this beautiful poem. This is written by a 13-year-old kid, friends. This is his artwork, the only artwork we have from him. We have no photograph of this child. And he writes this poem. Can everyone hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
The first train. About that first train that comes into the ghetto. And those of you who would like to take this further with your students, to take them in the direction of them creating artwork or creating poetry based on what they're learning, this is one of their peers. And he writes, it stopped at the wooden barrier, whistling woefully. It can't have wanted to go on to a place beyond the grave and destroy the colors painted on its body. Step by step, it covered the new tracks. 3 children with large, wondering eyes watched as the wheels turned and the train drove down the street. I closed my eyes. So this is what an unbeating heart of steel, driven by steam, looks like. It gives the world no choice at all. Under your wheels, my dear, I go a little further. And worms turn green on the iron tracks. They groan because they're made of muscle and whisper aloud their song of love. You monster, I'm alive. I too am alive. Next. By the way, I'll tell you where to get all of these quotes from Vedum. It's one of my Bibles. And Bredzik Frita shows after a train has left, the abandoned luggage. And for those of you who have visited Auschwitz, and if you haven't, just look up the suitcase display. And there's a new one also in the Museum of World War II in Gdansk, Poland. And I'm sure the Auschwitz display in New York also has the luggage. Where are the people? Abandoned luggage. Where are the human beings that belong to? Here in this nightmarish scene, with only these 3 bare trees to bear witness, the people are gone, the people are missing. All that's left is the luggage. Does anyone see a name on that luggage? No, it's just the numbers. Again, Bredzik Frita, the artist who created Tomi. Next. So we're going to talk about life, death, and deception in Tel Aviv. Now they're in the place. They're in the camp. Most Jews who arrive have to go into, like, the only word I can think of is kind of like a quarantine. They're a central place called the Slouse. Everything they own is stolen from them. And some of them are in this holding pen for almost a week until they're actually taken to the big barracks. And it's not until June 1942 that the city of Theresienstadt is defranchised as a city and the people are allowed to actually walk into the city. So someone who arrives in, beginning of 1942 is confined to big, stinking, terrible barracks, men and women separated. Here is what Joe Spire shows us. A beautiful street in the Ghetto Theresienstadt. Remember, this was artwork he was forced to create for the Red Cross visit of 1944. Next, here's a drawing he makes for us. This is what the conditions are really like. And we're going to delve into this in a minute. Ask your students, what did this place look like? We see the bunk beds, clothing all over, socks, socks never smell good even when you wash them, Jewish star, someone's old dirty handkerchief hanging there, all kinds of water vessels and bottles, and overseeing all of it, looking into the window, spying on them, showing them how triumphant it is. What do we see? The SS flag. Do you remember we saw it also in that artwork I just showed you, Leo Haas, the Jews entering, we saw the flag. Next, Morris Nagle, excuse me, kind of a plein air artist, an artist who likes to paint outside. He's a farmer, a Jewish farmer. He's actually caught painting in the town he lives in, and he's sent to Tel Aviv with his family. He does not survive Tel Aviv. He's sent to Auschwitz and murdered. But he makes a huge amount of drawings showing the conditions. And I want you to look at this together. If we were your students, what can we infer from these drawings? What are the living conditions like? Are they very overcrowded? Is there any privacy? Is there any place to hang up your stuff? You have 2 people lying in each of these beds. And one other thing, if you go to the next slide, there's something present here that most of us don't live with, unless you live in a little tiny 200, foot square apartment in Manhattan. Luggage is everywhere. What do you think that luggage says to these people? What do you think the message? Hope, Gail says this luggage, but Gail, it also means something else. It means tomorrow you may be on a transit list. It means you may be out of here tomorrow. Don't get comfortable. Don't settle in, because you may be out of here tomorrow. People, survivors from this ghetto, people who didn't survive, write about the fear of that ever-present, of the transit list, of being sent away, of not knowing if tomorrow is your last day. So we see here something that's always a little touching for me, and for those of us who are Jewish and maybe a little bit more religious, it looks like a talit. But you would take for those of you who are not familiar with the talit is a Jewish prayer shawl that we put on, men, not women, or some women do actually. Usually get it for your bar mitzvah, and when you pray mornings and on Chagim, it's there. People took this with them. For some people, they came back to their Judaism. Remember, these Czech Jews were not Hasidic Jews. They weren't that religious. For some people, they kind of came back to it in Tel Aviv. If they threw us in here because we're Jews, what does it mean to be Jewish? I should practice. I should be more of a Jew. Next. You may have noticed that the first 3 pictures I showed you were missing people. This artist, Dr. Carol Fleischman, who was a dermatologist before the war, and becomes a doctor in the ghetto, and he's not actually part of the artist group, even though he also was an artist. He studied art and medicine. He's doing this on his own, showing the horrors of the ghetto on his own. Look how he shows those bunk beds. They're monumental. They're like mountains. They're filled with these masses of these almost like wavy, crazy lines. People have to go up these ladders. The human beings are dwarfed by all of the clutter and all of the confines and the people with no privacy. Next. And Bedjik Frita again, look at the living conditions. Human beings need a little bit of privacy. When you go to the bathroom, you need privacy. If you want to sit 5 minutes by yourself because you're in a bad mood and you don't want to see anyone, you need privacy. Is there any privacy here? What else do we see? Do we see elderly people, young people, children? We'll talk about children soon. They actually turn the electricity off at night to save electricity. Talk to survivors, read memoirs of those who didn't survive. No electricity at night. Terrifying, these great big cavernous buildings with no electricity, no heat, goes without saying. Conditions are appalling. Everyone's sitting on their luggage. Again, you don't know if you're being shipped out tomorrow. It's uncertainty. You can't really build something on the air here. Not bad compared to other camps, so not bad. Well, yes, but it was pretty awful. Barbara, you have to remember that about 150,000 people came through Theresienstadt. 33,000 people died of the conditions in the camp. 33,000 people died of illness, died of starvation, died of diseases, as I said, and 88,000 were deported. So it's pretty nasty. It's pretty bad. It may not have been the same as, for example, Dachau or Buchenwald, but yes, the first train by Hannes Hachenberg. Thank you so much, Irvin. And I'm going to show everyone, could they bring in the Shabbat? Definitely, thank you. And Barry, we're going to talk about the Shabbat in a minute. Thank you. Next. And I think we're going to skip it. Pavo Fanto, one of my absolute favorite artists. Pavo Fanto was a doctor also. He was actually in the Czech army. He was in charge of the infectious medicines, very up and coming, definitely part of Czech society, Czech doctor, as were most of these people. Sent to the camp, has an incredible sense of humor, makes a Bible called the Terezin Bible, filled with these cynical drawings. They're absolutely wonderful. Dies and murders in 1944, I think it's a death march, 44 or 45. And he shows us Christmas in Theresienstadt. Now, there were some people in Theresienstadt who were Jews who had converted. A lot of Czech Jews, as German Jews, were kind of culturally Czech. Some of them celebrated Christmas, not as a religious holiday, but kind of as a cultural date. So some people had trees. So here we see the first Christmas, 1941. That's actually a 1, friends. If you're in Europe or Israel, we put a line through the 7. So it's 1941. He arrives, he's hale and hearty, he's got color in his cheek, there's Christmas celebrations, his bag is filled with stuff. 1942, he's already beginning to get bald. The bed is already missing the sheets. The bag is a little smaller. There's only 1 candle on the Christmas tree. 1943, his clothes are already ragged. The bed has almost no clothes, no bedding on it. And 1944, he's an emaciated skeleton. So it's called metamorphosis. And, the Czech sense of humor, even again, we're Polish Jews, my family came from Grodno, but the Czech sense of humor is this very biting, funny sense of humor. And this reference, to Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. For those of you who know the story about Gregor Samsa wakes up and he's a giant cockroach, would not have been lost. The humor would have been lost on the people of the camp. Next. Now, Barry, I'm going to kind of talk about what Barry said. Because here we have another artist. And I want to show you what's different about this drawing? What's different? I think that Ella is really going to like this one. We still see kind of Belagan color. Lots of onto the bed and the and the kind of not dirty, the clutter. Darkness and clear. But this was actually a barracks that was
Liz,
called
I'm sorry, sorry,
yes?
Liz, could you just repeat your last few sentences? You cut out a bit.
Okay. The women are living in the one barracks because they have the same conviction. It's called Bet Chalutzot. A chalutza in Hebrew is a pioneer. In other words, these are people who have desire to come and farm the land of Israel and create a Jewish homeland. And they lived in their own little room. But what act of resistance are these women doing? And Barry got it before. Can you see what they're doing? For my non-Jewish friends who are a little less familiar, celebrating the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. That's very good. Hanukkah, we see the Chanukiah. We see the Shabbat candles. Friends, in almost every single camp, despite onto their beliefs. And you know, you would think, and this is what the Nazis thought, put them in the camp, treat them like animals, take away their food, dehumanize them, and they will, you know, be at each other's throats. The idea that you could still find belief, that you could still find togetherness, that you could still have some kind of vision for a future. And Erich Michbaleski did survive the war, as did his wife, and he eventually, after, did come to Israel. It's something very, very, it's an act of resistance. I think it's a very beautiful one. And remember that in all of this darkness, there is still hope. People still hoped. Remember the tree from Felix Nussbaum. People still didn't want to give up their beliefs. Still didn't want to give up who they were. They even dress up for Shabbat in their clothing. And Ellen writes, celebrating Jewish holidays, you can't take a lot away, but you cannot take away who you are at heart. Thank you so much, Ellen. The Nazis thought they could. In some cases, they succeeded. In many cases, they didn't. Next. And Ruth Bundy, who very sadly passed away a few years ago, she was the great voice of Theresienstadt. She survived. She became an Israeli journalist, an Israeli writer. She became really one of the experts on this terrible place, having lived through it. And she says the hard work, the nerve-wracking, endless standing in queues for food, water, the toilets, having to be home in time before the curfew, usually at 8 p.m., meeting parents, husband or wife, the children, a friend, frequent illnesses, fear of transports, mourning the death of a parent in the ghetto, the constant feeling of hunger, not a hunger driving you crazy like other places, but hunger is gnawing like a small mouse, that never-ending chain of maladies, affecting also children and youth, impetigo, encephalitis, typhoid, scarlet fever, hepatitis, diarrhea, the fleas, the bed bugs biting mainly at night. One needed one's strength, first of all, for a day-to-day existence. Kind of sums up what Theresienstadt was like. Next. Well, the Nazis, if you remember, one of the other purposes of this camp is deception. And I want to show you the depths that they sank to. And I saw one of you wrote in the messages that your mother-in-law had been in the camp and she had money from the camp. Well, what would look more normal than to set up a bank? On the left is a report the Jews were forced to create for the Nazis to send to their higher-ups of the Jewish Self-Administration Bank. The one on the right is a drawing by Joe Spear from that same folio that was given to the Red Cross in 1944. They actually have almost 40 people working in a bank in the ghetto with money that's absolutely useless. Absolutely useless. And the money itself is called Moses Conan. And if you go to the next slide, this is what it looks like. I've read that the only use you could have from the Moses Conan, there was a library in the ghetto of books that had been confiscated when people arrived. And if you ran up a library fine, you could maybe give them 20 Moses Conan. But look at this money. First of all, the cynicism here, that the only figure that Jews can relate to is Moses. And the whole of human history, that's all they can relate to. It's called Moses Conan because Czech currency is called Conan. But now I'm going to tell you the interesting story about the Moses. So go to the next slide. Because the artist who created that Moses, his name was Peter Keen. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant man. Artist, lyricist, librettist. It's like a kind of a Renaissance man, murdered at the age of 25. He writes the libretto for an original opera written in the ghetto called The Emperor of Atlantis. And he is also the artist who is forced to make the Moses. Now, being a normal human being and taking a figure of such reverence like Moses, he creates the Moses on the left. And there he is, Moses, Moses our father, look at him, respectable, handsome figure. And the drawing goes to Prague. You know, to make money, you take your drawing, you send it to an engraver, and it's engraved, and that's how you can create the money. And it goes to Prague to be engraved. And the story is, I'm not sure if it's Heydrich or some other SS higher up. Some people say it's Heydrich. Sees the money, curious. He says, who's this handsome looking man on the left? That's not who Jews are. Jews are ugly. Jews have black curly hair. Jews have hooked noses. Jews are ugly. you have to change this figure to reflect the Jewish people. It goes back to Peter Keen. I can tell you as an illustrator and an artist, when I have a client who's a pain in the butt and wants too many changes, sometimes you just like exaggerate, just like to get them out of your hair. So look at the Moses he creates. Look at that kind of crazy looking curly hair, big pronounced hook nose. He like does it, and we say in Hebrew, dafka. Like, all right, you want it, here you got it. And the Nazis accepted it, and they printed it on their money. So the Moses Conan, created by this artist Peter Keen, was a second You got it, Morgan? Did you move it?
Sorry, we missed that last part.
Which part did we miss about the, let me see. Did I tell you that it was sent to Prague to be,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we got that part, sorry.
Yeah, okay, next. All right, if you look at me, ignore me, but if you look at the building on the right with the little tower above it, today it's a bank. There's actually a hotel there also. Don't even get me started. But during the time of the ghetto, that was the SS Kommandantur. And next door to that was a coffee shop, was a cafe that was set up in 1943, also to give this air normalcy. Next. Now, you know, some people talk about Telesi like this. You would go from one opera to the other, and this cultural event and that cultural event. And when Jews weren't watching the ghetto swingers in the cafe, they were off to see Brundabar or you know, some other opera. Not really true. This is Joe Spire again. I don't know why it says Banks. Sorry, a little wonky there. This is his version of the cafe for the Red Cross visit. Let's see how Leo Haas shows it to us. Next. Look at this. Every 6 months, perhaps, people were given a ticket to go to the cafe. On this particular day, the elderly people were allowed to come out of their attic. We're going to talk about the elderly people very soon. Does that look like an enjoyable cafe? They're half alive. They're drinking some kind of ersatz, if they're lucky, coffee, it's probably some kind of water. If you see the line with the thing with the three little circles in it, that means it's someone who's blind. There's some poor old deer stroking away on the cello over there. If you look on the lower left, there's one little lady who seems in rapture. This poor little old woman who must have come from Vienna or come from Prague and remembers the days when she could go to a concert. The people would be allowed here for half an hour, and then they'd be herded back to their barracks. Not exactly a pleasant experience. And look who's looking through the window. Does everyone see the guy looking through the window? Now, do you remember I told you, thank you, that next door to this was the SS Kommandantur? That's one of the SS officers peeking in. And can you imagine the fear of being so close to the SS when you're supposed to be reveling and having a good time in this cafe? And one of the kind of wags of the ghetto, who writes a poem in one of the ghetto newspapers, writes about how in the, paraphrasing, how in the cafe, it's so nice, you can get choco and whipped cream, and next door you can just get whipped. Next. Also, Leo Haas showing the blind leading the blind. Blind people arriving in the ghetto with no place to go, being, you know, no one there to help them. We're going to talk about what happened to those people in a minute. Next. Adolf Assenberg, another one of these artists who had been a film set creator in Prague before, makes his version of the elderly people in the coffee shop. Notice how we have the same artist drawing the same things, different artists. Next. We're going to skip this one. We're going to go on. Next. Because I'm going to talk now, again, about certain events that the same artist showed and bore witness to. And if you talk to anyone who was in this camp, If you talk to, read memoirs, read the diary of Egon Redlich, the leader of the youth organizations, who, yes,
Hi, Liz.
yes.
Hi. We wanted to see if anybody had any questions before you
Okay, jump in.
went forward with this one.
Alrighty,
If you have
anyone have
any
any questions?
questions, please put it in the chat.
They can be general questions about teaching about art,
They can be general questions about teaching about art.
using art resources.
Questions about prior artists or about teaching the art.
I can't, if there is anyone, I can't hear. So, no questions, just soaking it all in, Emily said. Yeah, I hope also that you're getting a good kind of example how you can use art to create a whole lesson plan. Notice, with the exception of my photograph in the ghetto, I haven't showed you any photographs. Why? There aren't any. There may be 2 or 3 photographs taken, and there are photographs taken by Maurice Russell, who was the who was the, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Maurice Russell was one of the 3 representatives of the Red Cross. He was the Swiss Red Cross representative, a real piece of, we'll talk about him soon, who takes, I think, 25 photographs, propaganda photographs of the setup. We have some stills from the propaganda movie, and there's almost no films from television stuff. How do we know what it looked like? Through the eyes of the artists. About the Danish Jews in television, yes. Gail, we're going to get to them in a minute because they will always be bound up with the Red Cross visit. The Red Cross visit was one of the very few countries in the world that actually gave a damn about its own citizens was Denmark. Most of the Jews of Denmark were ferried to safety in about a month by the Danish underground. A wonderful act, although we know that they had to pay for that passage also. And about 340 Danish Jews were not warned or couldn't leave Denmark, and those Jews were sent to Tennessee. They had much better conditions. You could actually see the barracks that they were housed in when you go to the ghetto itself. But to visit them, the Danish, we want to know what condition our Danish citizens are being kept in. We demand a Red Cross visit. And we're going to get to that visit soon because it's fascinating. So you know what we'll do? I think we're going to skip over these next 3 drawings. Let's see them as we go through. And we're going to go to the story of the elderly people.
Can you draw her attention that there are 2 questions
Yes,
in the chat
the
box?
Danish Jews, these are based.
Hi, Liz. There's 3 questions in the chat box.
Right, okay, great. So Alexander, do you walk students through inquiry-based thinking? Think what? You can take students everywhere with this. You don't need to do all the explanations I'm doing because they're so interesting, these drawings. Give them the history. Let them discover things. Tell them what they're discovering. Let them see how, why are we drawing bunk beds with no people in them? Why are we drawing all of these things? Your kids are going to come up with amazing things. And what it does is it creates a picture also of inhumanity. How could people possibly do this to their fellow human beings? But also, how did people deal with this? How did they create some kind of normalcy in a place that had nothing normal, in the place that was so much uncertainty? Why would they make art in the first place? What fears did they have? What hopes did they have? You could see all that through the artwork. Your kids will bring you to it. Give them the artwork. Give them the background. Guide them with the history of what they're seeing. And they'll create this whole unit really through their own intuition. And they could also be looking for things online. They could look for documents. They could look for testimony and link it all in with the artwork. You could create a much bigger picture based on the artwork. Okay, depend on the grade level and prior experience with art, the Holocaust or both. Agreed, Steve. But you could also take the drawings, because I'm not going to get to finish everything today. The drawings done with Friedel Dicker Brandeis, whose drawings I will briefly go through. How did children experience their world? And I'm going to show you some drawings from teenagers that you could also just focus on with students. So I think you can find a way. If you have younger students, Tomi, the artwork with Tomi. If you have teenage students, Petter Gintz and Helga Weissova. If you have students who are advanced students, the drawings I've been showing you, what does it mean to have 6 artists draw the same scene? You know, you could take it in so many different levels, and I think that's the strength and power of art. Okay, the 2 Moses pictures, you get the first one. I think the first Asian is not the actual one. He didn't get to draw it because the Nazi official said it wasn't ugly enough. It had to be ugly because Jews are ugly. Nancy, that's my answer to you, Nancy. Okay? So he had to redo it to make them ugly. Okay, I'm going to continue. I'm going to talk about an unknown, really not talked about part of this whole terrible story. And that is the terrible fate of elderly people. The terrible fate of elderly Jewish people. If we go to the next slide, and I'm talking of Jewish people from Germany, Jewish people from Austria, in the Wannsee conference, which you probably are learning about. If not, look up Wannsee. Heydrich announced that Theresienstadt would be used as a place to put Jews over the age of 65. Why? There's a little problem going on in Germany. People are disappearing. People are, you know, they're starting in September 41, they start to deport them. There were some good people who asked questions. Not a lot. So we're taking the neighbor away. Where'd he go? Oh, that neighbor, he's going to work in the East. We've set up workplaces in the East. They're going to have a better life there. And some people said, really? That neighbor lost his legs fighting for this country in World War I. He's blind. What kind of work is he going to do in the East for us? So to kind of build this camouflage around what their true intentions were, the Nazis decided that they would pose, and we can go to the next one, which should just be pictures of these beautiful old people. Go next, from Prague. And I've done research and found these people from their passports from before the war, the paper passports. These are the people we're talking about, these dear old folks who are going to be told that they have to give up the money and give up their property, sell their houses to purchase a house in the spa town of Tbilisi. And they actually have to sign contracts. And if you go to the next picture, this was a contract. It's I'm sorry, Michael, you probably could pronounce it better than me. A Heimkaufvertrag contract where Jews are forced to buy a place in Tbilisi Ghetto with their own money so they could support everyone else as well. And there's some particulars from the contract. If you go one closer, one next, you can see here that in exchange for doing this, they're going to have accommodation in a home for life, have their laundry done, provide any medical care or medicines required, and to ensure a hospital stay if necessary. But if it's not exactly what they want, they don't have grounds for legal claims. Okay, next. After they sign these things, these poor old folks, they are taken to a temporary gathering place on Mita in Berlin. Then they're taken to one of 3 stations in Berlin, and they are shipped off to Theresienstadt. And when I take groups to Berlin, this is the memorial in Grunewald. It's called Platform 17. I don't
Hi,
like just
Liz.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. There was a question in the chat.
Grunewald, thank you, Michael.
How are these pieces of artwork not destroyed? How were they saved?
Great question. Thank you, Irvin.
And then
wonderful. A lot of it was hidden. A lot of it was hidden. For example, I think the works of, I forgot who it was, but his work was found in 1950. He had hidden it. You know, the ghetto today is exactly as it was. The buildings are still there. And they're big, big buildings, and people, you know, hid them in attics, hid them behind walls. And when people renovate these buildings, they find stashes. So some of it was found in stashes in buildings. The artwork of Friedel Dicker Brandeis was actually found in suitcases and I think the rafters in one of the buildings. So we are actually still finding things today, believe it or not. We don't have that happening with a place like Warsaw because Warsaw Ghetto was almost completely destroyed. So we have what the Ringelblum archives, but a lot of the artwork and things that were created were not. So that's how these things were preserved. Okay, how are these pieces of artwork destroyed? All right, wonderful. Okay, Paul, what was your question? Paul, man, I can't find your question.
Oh, that was her question.
That was it. Okay,
Yep, that
Paula,
was the question. You got it.
wonderful. Okay, I just want to show you, if you go to the next slide, Julie Wolfhard, you know, to take this from us being numbers. Julie Wolfhard was this beautiful German Jewish artist. She works with Kata Kolowitz, the great German expressionist, a social reformer. She's 78 years old, this poor little old lady, and she's deported from Berlin to Terezin. And I just want to let her artwork be her tombstone. Go to the next slide, please. Look at that. Look how beautiful. I love the Hexenwald, the German mythology, the kind of the wood nymph, the witch, the forest witch. Some of the beautiful artwork she creates in her lifetime. Even in Theresienstadt, she dies at the age of 80, probably of starvation and illness in the ghetto. She manages to remain alive for about a year. People say she still created art in the ghetto. You know, so again, please make sure your students understand. We're not just talking about numbers. We're not just talking about, you know, an old person. Behind everyone is a human being. Kata Kolowitz, thank you so much. Michael, she works with her. She's one of her contemporaries. I can't hear you, Erwin. Okay, am I continuing?
Yes, you're good. Thank you.
Okay, next one, please. Now, when they're sent to the camp, this is again Peter Keen. He has to create this report for the Nazis in October 42. Look how many people, if you go to the next slide, it shows you the age breakup of people in Terezin in 1942. We have, in 1942, in October, there are 2,761 people under the age of 15. We have 17,750 people between the ages of 16 and 55. And we have 32,788 elderly people over the age of 66. The Nazis say too many old people here. It's unsustainable. They're not working. They don't have food for them. Some of them have Alzheimer's. They're a burden. And they are sent on 10 transports to Theresienstadt, to Treblinka. So go next one. They're called the Alta Transporta. We're just gonna go through these. This as we go through, look at the conditions for elderly people here and how so many artists created. This is called overcrowding. Show these 3 drawings, one after the other, please, Morgan. Everyone take a look and tell me what you see in these 3 drawings that's so unusual. Next. 3 totally different artists. And let's go to the next one. You see them living in shops? Can you imagine housing people who are so sick and needy and fragile and mentally, distressed because their families aren't there in a shop? So these are the people. The overcrowding is so horrible. In October, beginning in October 1942, they have these transports. Inhumane, Randy, definitely. And that's an issue today also with the coronavirus. My husband works in a home for the aged here in Jerusalem. 9 people died of the coronavirus in his home. Most of the victims have been people in old age homes. Even today, how we treat elderly people is a big problem. I think it's something you can relate to your children, to your students. Next. Different artist, Malva Shalek, brilliant Jewish woman who is sent to Auschwitz because she refused to draw the portrait of a collaborationist doctor, showing us the conditions of old people. Next. again, called Rest. Look at this poor old lady, she's had to work so hard, and the terrible thing, she's falling asleep on her feet. Next. And Elisa Sheck writes that these people were a nightmare to all of us. They were the ones who were starving the most, had the worst dwellings, were sick continuously, and were naturally dying. Every day, scores of them died. We saw them sitting around on benches, dressed in their city clothes, with hats and knitted gloves, somehow pretending to live a normal life. It was also pathetic and horrible to see them sitting there, engaged in conversation, formally addressing each other as Herr Professor and Frau Doctor. They were all lonely here. Their families had either emigrated or had been deported. When I have nightmares, it's just about these old people. They were completely lost. Next. I want to show you again the artists showing this, the deprivation of these elderly people. Next. Look at this. Morgan was an artist who didn't work with anyone. He was not a trained artist. He never drew after the war again. But he makes a series. He feels compelled to draw the horrors of what he sees in the ghetto. Look at these people that's lying on the sidewalk. No one to help them, out in the sun. Some of them, you know, with infirm and what's it called? Can't walk, etc. It's horrible. Next. Is the next one the pie chart? Next. Just to give you an idea, this is a pie chart of just one transport from Telezerstadt to Treblinka. It was all women. Nobody survived. Of the larger area, that orangey area, 1,343 women aged 61 to 85. 61 to 85. Only 8 men, excuse me, were on the transport. A few men, but most of them were women. There are transports where everyone was women, elderly women. We kind of forget that story of the Holocaust, what happened to these old people. Next. I'm going to show you another act of kindness, a beautiful act that you can talk about with your students, because Moritz Müller was a very prominent in the art scene in Prague. He was a trained artist. He ran an art gallery. He was really involved in the art scene. When he arrives in the ghetto, he's not sent to work in the technical department. He's sent to be an orderly in the urology hospital. In other words, people who have terrible urological problems. The place smells like urine. It's filled with people who are in pain. There is no antibiotics. There's no operations they could do for these people. It's just a way of keeping them until they die. He feels so moved by the plight of these poor elderly people. He creates 500 portraits of them. He himself is murdered in Auschwitz in 1944, but he makes 500 portraits of these elderly people where he knows their name, he puts the name on them. He talks to them, he gives them comfort, he shows their human faces. Next. Let's run through the next.
Liz, just to let you know, you have about 5 more minutes, okay?
5 more minutes, wait, okay. So let's go through these old people, and then we're just gonna finish up with some of the kids' artwork. For me, it's incredibly touching. Also as an artist, that you would just go and make it your duty to give these people a little bit of immortality, to say, no one may know who you are, but I haven't forgotten you. You're not forgotten. I'm going to draw you and make sure that you're remembered. You know what, because I think a lot of people are using, I never saw another butterfly, I know about Bundybar. I will talk in the last thing about the Red Cross visit, so we can go back to Denmark. So if you just go down, because I could really talk for another 3 hours, but we're gonna go down to the Red Cross visit. It's, I think, this right at the end. There's 2 or 3 slides towards the end. Peter Gintz, you know, these are my heroes. Helga Vaisova, please read her book and see her artwork. But we're gonna go down to here, to the Red Cross visit. And we're gonna go, if you go up in the top, right to my little picture of me standing there. Yeah, okay. This is what it looks like today. When the Danish Red Cross insists on this visit, go down, thank you. The Commandant, Ram, asked for a few months to get ready. That should have been a red light already. About 17,000 Jews were sent in 3 transports to Birkenau, to what's called the family camp, the Familienlager. For those of you who have been to Birkenau, it's towards the beginning of the camp. It's the second camp over. Remember I talked about there's different camps. So you're not going to have to go all the way into the camp, a kilometer in, and see the gas chambers, etc. Their conditions are slightly better in case the Red Cross also wants to visit Auschwitz, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the camp is cleaned up. They got rid of these 17,000 people. If you look at these drawings by Leo Haas and the next one, go down. Go down another one. The middle of the camp that had been used, had a big circus tent and was kind of used as a concentration camp. They were making boxes and things to put machinery in. That's cleared up. They plant flowers and trees. They put a bandstand in, and they start to train a group of people to be kind of actors in this Potemkin village should the Red Cross, when the Red Cross comes to visit. Everyone else was kept indoors. They beautify the ghetto. It's called the Great Beautification of the Ghetto. They're so cynical that they actually mask out a route, which is going to take about 8 hours, and all the buildings on that route are painted, flowers are planted. Survivors said, can you imagine how we felt seeing the ghetto, like, you know, charted up like this? But inside, the conditions were still appalling, except for the places the Nazis were going to be going. And the Red Cross visit duly arrives, and there were 2 members of the Danish Red Cross and this piece of Maurice Russell, who you may tell is not one of my favorite people. Maurice Russell was what my British husband calls a jobs body. He got a good cushy job working for the Red Cross. He wasn't inquisitive. He didn't really want to know. He took it on face value, everything he was seeing. So the Red Cross arrives. They see the head of the Jewish council called Pavo Epstein, who had actually had a black eye. And he was forced to like be the jovial leader and takes him around in a car. Maurice Russell doesn't say, why does the leader of the Jewish council have a black eye? Why can't I go into this building? Why can't I talk to these people? He takes it on face value. He takes about 24 pictures. These are photographs he takes. And after this visit, he writes this glowing report. If I can contribute to some small measure to dispel the mystery surrounding the Theresienstadt ghetto, we shall be satisfied. He says it's not an Endlager. It is an Endlager. Nobody's sent away from this camp. He doesn't know what the Jews are complaining about. They're a little bit communist anyway. And it's taken on face value. And the tragedy here is this. Himmler had gotten, permission was given to the Red Cross to visit Auschwitz-Birkenau. We actually believe Maurice Russell had gone to Auschwitz before, but to go into Birkenau. And the Red Cross says, it's probably a nice place like this, and they cancel the visit. And once they cancel the visit, as we saw with Yuda Bacon, the Jews are sent, I'm almost done, are sent and murdered in the gas chambers. He was interviewed by Claude Lanzmann many years later. And he said to him, how could you have been so fooled? Why didn't you stand up? Why didn't you ask to do more? Why didn't you? And his answer was, it's the Jews' fault. They were so passive, nobody approached me, so I didn't even ask them. I mean, these people are under duress. They have people kept behind in buildings. If anyone talked to the Red Cross, those people would have been murdered. So that's the story of the Red Cross. And we're going to finish with this one last, the movie. A movie ensues after it, a 24-minute movie, fascinating story, but we'll save that for another time. We're just going to finish with the words of Ruth Bundy. Can we go back, please? One more. Okay. And this is why I think it's so important to teach the story of Theresienstadt. Tomorrow you're going to be learning about Lodz Ghetto, you're going to be learning about Warsaw Ghetto. We have photographs from those places. We have here, we're depending on human memory. We're depending on artwork from the time. And this is the importance of transmitting the material on Ghetto Theresienstadt to future generations, not only as a testimony of an era, but testimony of the readiness of individuals to accept responsibility for the community, to not give up, testimony for the ability of man to learn, to create, to laugh, to love, even in the most difficult of circumstances.
Liz,
all right, friends.
Thank
Yes.
you so much. Can you watch all of us clapping? And if you have
thank
the
you.
ability,
to put up a clap sign, please do.
I'm clapping also. Thank
Liz,
you.
And I thank you because for me, you ended it on a positive note. And when you were taking a breath, I quick called my friend, historian, Dr. Michael Hayes, and I said, am I correct in ending this way with a few announcements? And he said, yes. And that is the power of a country. And you said it. It was the Danish, was the International Red Cross, but the Danes are the ones that pushed the International Red Cross to go, to look. And I always tell my students that they've read Number the Stars, and to tell them, in these times, even today, please, your voice counts. Let your country know what you want. And of course here, those of you that are teaching high school seniors, we're teaching college students, the power of the vote to whatever your inclination may be. And so I always pass that on to our students. Liz, you were A++ phenomenal. And many of the participants asked the following question: can I register for tomorrow? Because now Liz whetted my appetite about photographs. The answer is yes. We do
Wonderful.
have 70 people registered for tomorrow, but please, the registration is still open. You can email us, or you may have the form already. Very, very important. Please, I'm begging, please do the evaluations. If every one of you put in the chat box, thank you. Please make sure you do the evaluations. This is so important to us. So yesterday, our sentence that we said at the end was, we learned about the human story. Today, my summary says, and I love what you said, Liz, don't just teach a laundry list. How many of us do that, including me sometimes? Okay, we're going to learn the dates. Create normalcy through artwork. Guide them. Let them use their own intuition. Boy, that cuts to the hearts and souls of all of us. Find a way in all the many different levels, because we are all teaching different levels of students. And the power of art. Amazing. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Be safe, be well, our love to Jerusalem, and I
Thank
hope
you.
we'll see so many of you tomorrow. You were wonderful participants. Thank you all for joining us today. Goodbye, and we hope we see you tomorrow, Wednesday, or on Thursday. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Shalom.
Shalom, shalom.